Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast. I, Toby Haydock, have been challenged to watch a story by a friend of mine. They've chosen their favourite things about each episode, so I have to commentate along and try to guess what those favourite things might be.
Hello, Toby. As requested, here are 5 things that I like about Remembrance of the Daleks from 1988.
Hello there, everybody. It's time for the final episode of Remembrance of the Daleks for Happy Times and Places. The first voice you heard there was Charles Norton, producer extraordinaire of Doctor Who animations, etc. In fact, I was talking to Charles the day that I recorded this, just by coincidence. I always know when he calls me because my phone doesn't recognise his number. I think I mentioned that. So it's either him or somebody trying to sell me timeshares or whatever. But he was telling me about the Emitron cameras that were used by the BBC at Alexandra Palace, and telling me all sorts of stuff I didn't know about them, and indeed about the cameras that followed, and some of the Doctor Who's that they worked on, and some interesting camera facts. He's that kind of guy. He's the guy you go to for that stuff, which I never remember either. So, I have to record it and write it down and, refer to notes and stuff, because I think my head doesn't remember lots of stuff now. And I think it's always been primed to remember the stuff that really interests me, the stuff about the actors or the personnel or whatever. And I think my brain is resigned to the fact that when it hears certain things, it just goes, yeah, you won't remember this. You need to either make a note of this or, as I did with the conversation today, record it and refer to it later. But that's fine. I'm nearly 50, and there are a lot of things in my mental storehouse. I think I can accept that not everything's going to stick there these days. It is rather sad, though, because it's one of the few talents I have is remembering things, and I'm not as good at remembering things as once I was. But that's life's rich tapestry, isn't it? What happens is it eventually frays, and all the threads fall out, and you're just left with a holy gauze. Anyway, let's not continue with metaphors for my mental disintegration. Let us get to the last episode of this, which I have thoroughly enjoyed so far. I hope you have. It's a bit of a cliche that Remembrance of the Daleks is an enjoyable story, but for me it's been a journey, because I used to be very, very cross with it, partially because I was sort of cross with this era because it coincided with the age when I was a cross person, a cross young thing who wanted everything to be like it was in the days. To coin a phrase, I never got to see the old days, but I know it's not as good now as it used to be. But also the fact that this was obviously the most popular of the season, and I was a great fan, and still am, of Greatest Show in the Galaxy. So almost this was the one risk to Greatest Show, because nobody really liked Happiness Patrol, the Silver Nemesis, anyway, at the time. So I needed to be cross with Remembrance of the Daleks, because that was the one that would steal votes at some imaginary poll in my head from Greatest Show, which I adored, and as I say, I still do like. That's a silly way to be. Or it's not. It was just my way to be. It was my way of negotiating through the territory of being a furious teenage Doctor Who fan. But I think, now it's older, isn't it? Is it older than An Unearthly Child? What are we in now? Is it? Oh, well, I'm not going to even do the maths. It's around that, isn't it? It's older now. Yeah, it is. It's older now. Gosh, it's older now than An Unearthly Child was when this was on. And when this was on, Unearthly Child was in the dark old days of fusty black and white, and it was paraded by, it was inhabited by ghosts, long dead people and all of that. Sorry, my phone is going crazy. That's my text message is the TARDIS noise. But now I think of, Remembrance of the Daleks is new. It's and actually, it is largely populated by the living. And the people in it are, many still working and still going strong, and hopefully with us for a long time yet to come. So, but anyway, they're not all still with us, and I'm sure during this commentary, some of my words will be a remembrance for those that are not. So, without further ado, let us press play on episode 4 of Remembrance of the Daleks in 3, 2, 1. Well, what a transformation. I genuinely think this is an excellent slice of Doctor Who, and I spent an awful lot of time getting cross with it on principle, I think, rather than... Well, I think there is something that one has to acknowledge, and I don't know if it's just me, because I see other people doing things and I judge them I judge them against my own poor standards, if you like. So, I think part of my reason for being cross with this was because everybody else loved it. So I wanted to be the things that I thought were flawed about it. Obviously, the repetition of exterminate and the fact that this doesn't actually tie in with Doctor Who continuity, and that if you're going to be so tied up with, the first episode, for example, well, one, get the book cover right and get the spelling of Foreman right, but that's minor. But two, he's planning a fate for his arch enemies, who he actually doesn't meet for another 5 weeks, in terms of what this is tying into. But that's all. I mean, that's all. I love The Deadly Assassin. I don't mind its contradictions to the past. You kind of live with it, and it's an excellent production, and it's an exciting story. But I think part of me, and this spaceship landing is fantastic, and I love the way that the those turret bits land on where the oil slicks are, and you go, oh yeah, of course. And this is all practical effects, and I love that. And there is something more sort of solid and sort of pleasingly there about a spaceship made out of skips than one out of computerized pencil flourishings. Look at it, it's there, glorious. But there was part of me that liked the fact, or cast myself as the hero in my own narrative, that all the obvious people, they choose the obvious favourite one, which is the Dalek-y one with all the ties to the olden days, whereas I like the brave new world of the psychic surface with its, that nobody talks about enough, because they can't see that it's brilliant and blah, blah, blah. And it's, none of that's about enjoyment, is it? It's all about how one feels one wants to cast oneself. Now, I don't know if that's just me, but it's like I like the idea that I support the underdog. If there's a famous football team playing a non-league football team, I'll always go for the non-league football team. I like feeling that I'm somebody that doesn't follow the crowd, or that as I say, that supports the less obvious or the underdog. But that can become quite self-satisfied if you're not careful. That's Tip-Tipping there, helping to arrest Mike Smith. We'll talk about him later. I like that scene between him and Ace, by the way, and Sophie Aldred does it very well. I love this. There's an explosion here, isn't there, where the Dalek gets sort of hit. And seeing as we're quite used to Daleks shooting at each other and missing, but that's a nice little hit on the walls there, and you can't see, it's not like they're bang next to each other like they are in Revelation of the Daleks, but that's fantastic. I love all of these explosions. Sometimes that bit where it sort of hits him and the other two retreat, and then the gunfire into the camera. This is all excellent Dalek direction. I have to say, for all the the subtext about the evils of racism and all the lovely links to the past, there's something about blowing loads of Daleks to bits that is extraordinarily satisfying, and the action sequences for Doctor Who are very, very well done here. But back to that special weapons Dalek. Now, there'd been talk of this I love the fact that it has oil dripping from it. You kind of feel that Daleks maybe need a bit more of the kind of mechanics. I'm sure when I interviewed Stephen Mansfield and Sue Moore, they were a bit disparaging of the special weapons Dalek for Who's Round. And I think and I love the fact that it just sort of it trundles out and just goes kaboom. And it sort of it makes sense with what we already have of the Daleks. It fits aesthetically and in terms of what we might think Daleks might do. If they can have an extension to their sucker that welds a door open as they cuts a door open as they do in the very first story. Why would they not have just a special bazooka Dalek, which I rather love? Sylvester McCoy's Doctor is absolutely one you can see. It's not abseiling, but whatever that is, sliding down the wire to get into the Dalek ship. This is essence of Doctor Number 7, and he does it very well. That sort of, although I think it was a stunt double doing the actual thing, but it doesn't matter. It's his legs akimbo, sort of physical. Sort of slightly comically physical scrambling about the place to get things done is beautifully Seventh Doctor, and that sort of madcap tumbling that he does is very Seventh Doctor. Tip-tipping actually gets a line here, doesn't he? Come off it, Sarge, or something. Tip-tipping sadly died in a stunt. Not too long after this, but he was obviously he was always a noticeable stuntman because he's called Tip-tipping. I think he was really called Tim, but died on an episode of Dial 999 when his chute failed to open. But yeah, his stunts on this period of Doctor Who are excellent, and he was an ex-Royal Marine, I think. But yeah, I'd seen him do, and he's in Aliens. He's Trooper Crow in Aliens. I used to know all of the different troopers in Aliens, and because it takes a while, you have to watch it a few times to work out which one's who. But he does get a shot when they're waking up from cryosleep, and he gets killed by sort of being flung through the air and smacked against the wall. It's not the best, but yeah, he's one of the. He's not Wierzbowski. Sorry, I've got a whole thing about the troopers in Aliens. I don't know why. This is all fun. Well done, Alison, for jumping in. The light coming up there is nice. This piece of incidental music is very good. It's sort of like. There's an eerie quiet, and Mike's on the run. He's such a great screen presence, Dursley McKinnon. And of course, for those who've been sleeping for the past couple of years, parts of his life were, inspired the storytelling of Ollie Alexander's character in. It's a Sin, the Russell T Davies series. He did a Twix advert at around this time as well. And there's a film, is it Just Ask Diamond, that I think is directed by Mark Greenstreet, or Mark Greenstreet's involved, that is dedicated to Dursley McClendon. I quite like this little bit of business with Sylvester with the umbrella, which I don't like particularly, but the umbrella. Stuck in the door. It's sort of just quite a nice little bit of business. Yes, I was watching George Sewell in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy the other day. The time controller has been deactivated. I'm sure somebody I was watching this didn't like the lines "nothing so mundane" either. Anyway, listen. She's got a great waspish look about her. He gets another line here, Sergeant Smith. And yeah, that's the Sylvester looking behind his ear and going, "Yeah, I can diagnose by doing that. I'm Doctor Who. Why not?" So listen. I want to talk about this thing about, yes, liking the image one has of oneself of going against the grain. Oh, but there's another brilliant explosion. That's the one that set off all the fire alarms in London, isn't it? This is like Doctor Who as an action movie, and considering that the state that the show had been in production wise the year before, which even objectify, even if you like the tone and sort of crazy comic capers of season 24. I wish George Sewell had done more in this. I didn't know George Sewell particularly well at this point, and I've since discovered loads of old telly, and he's magnificent in all of it. And he's a proper, he's one of the proper early naturalistic players. So we're lucky to get him in a part that doesn't get an awful lot to do, but glad that George Sewell was one of the notches on Doctor Who, the TV programme's bedposts. But listen, I do, because I find myself doing it. It's a ridiculous way to behave, but I find myself doing it sometimes if somebody puts an opinion out I don't like. I sort of think, well, you're just doing that because it makes you feel good. So for example, if somebody goes, here's a list of my favourite stories, and they'll go, my favourite William Hartnell story is whatever, something, obviously, the Dalek invasion of Earth. My favourite Patrick Troughton story is the Skyray commercial, because there are, I'm exaggerating slightly, but there are people that will... that will choose a really odd, a slightly sort of interregnum-y story, because there's been a few of those later in the series. Go, that's my favourite story. I go, if it's 5 minutes, I'm not sure it could be a story. But it doesn't. Why do I care? But I do sort of go, I think you're just trying to get some attention there. What, somebody on the World Wide Web or on a forum, on Twitter, where it's all about getting attention for your own opinions. Somebody's trying to get attention, Toby. Yes, of course they are. And actually what they're doing is they're using a method that you used internally back in the day in order to make yourself feel good. So, physician, heal thyself. So there we go. But as I say, I was cross with this story, but it was partially because, that's interesting, there's no shadow there, whereas they did take the trouble to put shadow on it elsewhere. And I think, I've got a feeling George Sewell dies with his eyes open, which I always think is slightly more disconcerting than your classic eyes closed death. So that's screen acting 101 there. If you want people to remember your death, you keep your eyes open. It's horrible. So well done, George. His final shot in Doctor Who is he goes out with a bang. These two have such a great rapport, and as I said, I don't really like the umbrella, but he doesn't half go for it. He's like, if I can use it to close a door, I will. Just use it to cup his balls. Anything. I don't know where that came from. And these two are good. You think that these two know each other. They have nice little bits of banter between them. Seeing as they don't get an awful lot to do, I think Pamela Salem is utter class. She's class in a cashmere, class in a cardigan. It's the effort, and there's something about every time somebody walks past the TARDIS in this. There's that brilliant bit in episode 1, isn't there, when Mike goes, "Hey, are you from somewhere else?" and they walk past the TARDIS. I love the aesthetic of that. This is great. That's a lovely shot. Obviously that's not practical. We've got a bit of CSO, but I like the framing of the sky and Ace's face. It's good. Skipping Schoolgirl with that excellent piece of sort of nursery rhyme type schoolyard singing music that, because we know the context is a bit more scary than that, is classic Doctor Who, because you've got the childish thing that we know is actually menacing, but because it's made out of recognisable things, the image of a schoolgirl, that nursery rhyme type playground type music. Pop goes the weasel, isn't it? £0.50, tuppenny rice, isn't it? That's a great shot as well of the ship going into the into the, not the airlock, but into the opening of the spaceship. Andrew Morgan, take a bow, because this is a really superior production at a time when Doctor Who had a reputation for being sort of tatty and embarrassing. They've really made an effort to make this an A-list production, and I love the fact that the telly is in black and white. That's a nice little touch back to obviously how Doctor Who had been watched back in the day, that this echoes and this this does. I'm not wild about Sylvester McCoy's sort of over enunciation of some of that stuff. I know what he's aiming for when he does it, but it doesn't quite do it for me. But I think that's just a matter of taste, because he's not like Tom Baker or Patrick Troughton. You know, he's not a. I mean, he has done Shakespeare, but largely, you know, Shakespeare clowns. But he's not a sort of sonorous classical actor whose enunciation is perhaps his strongest point. You don't come to him for sort of resonant line readings. In fact, I think he's one of those actors, from my limited experience, but from my observation, who probably gives you a different line reading pretty much on every take, because he hasn't necessarily, he's not as technical vocally in that sense. But what instead you get is a surprising reading, or a feeling of slightly more sort of spontaneity, which has its own advantages and charms. It's less to my taste than somebody sounding sonorous and soulful and classical and perhaps, you know, pin sharp comic timing. Sylvester McCoy's comic timing is slightly different. Again, it's a bit more chaotic and spontaneous, and I think sometimes it hits and sometimes it slightly misses. But that's not to criticise that. It's a different. He's obviously a very gifted clown, but yeah, it's a different. It's different styles of performing, isn't it? Terry Malloy as Davros, looking great. I love the misdirect of the Emperor Dalek. I mean, I think there was a feeling at the time. Could we have a Dalek story without Davros? Because Davros coming back in Genesis had been in Destiny had been, oh my god, that's so amazing. Because Davros at that point had only been in one Doctor Who story. He'd been in Genesis, and that was set in the past, and he dies. So, you know, his role in that story was to explain the creation of the Daleks and then sort of vanish. But he's such a fantastic character. Unlimited rice pudding is great, lovely line. And Terry Malloy actually sets up with his sort of ranting. He gives something for Sylvester McCoy to purchase on, to then do his mockery of that, and it's great. It's a great confrontation between, you know, what Davros does and what he is, and the Doctor. And what's lovely again is that the Doctor is fighting fire with fire. He's ranting back at Davros, but actually, as he covers the mic and whispers to the other guys, he's getting a rise out of Davros. So he's actually using Davros's weaponry against himself, and it's lovely. It's a lovely contrast, and it's a lovely illustration of you know, the Doctor using guile, where Davros uses his insane single-minded zealotry. And Terry Malloy's excellent, and I love those black lips that are sort of that are glistening with viscous moisture. I mean, look, he's gonna get so angry in a minute he might open his eyes. Oh no, because he hasn't got any. Anyway, don't get me started on that. Now this is big news. He's just vaporized Skaro. So I mean, I think that's quite a big deal. I mean, it's destroying a planet, I think, has consequences, whether the Thals are there or not. And I'm sure the subtext of this is that the Thals aren't there, because the Doctor wouldn't destroy a planet that had, you know, intelligent inhabitants on it. But it's bad news for the Magnodons, isn't it? It's bad news for those lovely little flowers like what Susan had. Sylvester McCoy does that very, very well, I think. I love the sort of no nonsense way that Davros just F's off. But that's, we don't really talk about the destruction of Skaro much, but it feels like the series going, right, let's do something to shake this up a bit. When, you know, returns to Skaro had become, I mean, it only happened twice, but they'd certainly become the norm. Davros coming into the show had become the norm, so actually they reserve him to episode 4. It's a show. I like the way Sylvester McCoy puts his hat on as well. It feels like the show, at this stage, towards the end of its life, is conscious of where it might just risk getting into a rut, and it tries to shake itself up a bit. And I think that's to the credit of everyone involved, even though the destruction of Skaro does seem a bit extreme to me. And this is, of course, Mike's death, isn't it? This is when we think, and it's so powerful that that laser that it knocks his stairs about 2 feet back. But it's a great stunt. A very elegant. An effective way of showing the power of what's been done to him. But I think you're still quite surprised that he's dead, but he is dead, because I think watching this we're going, well, has she killed him? And you think, well, that killed Ratcliffe, so, but you can't quite believe it, because he doesn't get to redeem himself, he doesn't sacrifice himself, he's still doing his baddie business. And I think that's quite brave, because I think the whole Mike storyline is excellent, and the casting is excellent, because Dursley McClendon is very good. He looks like a hero. He's absolutely beautiful. He's rugged. He carries himself like a hero. He speaks and conducts himself like a matinee idol. And he's a fascist. He's a dreary little racist. And for whatever, he says all that, quite reasonably tries to justify his prejudice. And the mirror breaking, lovely little touches like that. I love her scowling little look that she gives. I think she's brilliant. And I think this is brave as well. We've kind of had the big explosion earlier in the episode. We've just had the spaceship blow up. You go, well, what can we get? Get another bazooka? And I think that was originally the intention, wasn't it? That the Doctor was going to get a bazooka. And again, I think his look and his facial acting and that sort of mysterious kind of shroud of the millennia goes over his eyes that then pierce. It's sort of mistiness that he then pierces through. There's a great double skill to his face, which can look sort of whimsical and sort of lost and misty, but then can also be piercing and dangerous, and also very, very sad. That beautiful droopy mouth he has and that sad eyes. And I think that is a much behind the sofa. Love that. Ace comes up from behind the sofa. I think Sylvester McCoy's facial performance and just the wonderful physiognomy that he has is really effective there. And I think that's a really great, brave way to end it, to go, let's not have a big explosion. Let's have the Doctor, use and not cruelly. I mean, he has to be sort of quite cruel to force it to do what he does. And he's actually quite, he is quite sort of, he's sort of as mean as Tom Baker would be there, but there is a sadness to him as well, just inherent in that face. It's funny, I thought he might have been a little bit more melancholy there, but he can be quite harsh when he needs to be, Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. This was quite hard, because obviously I'd buried my granddad the week before, and I think I was quite upset after this episode, and I hadn't realised why, and then a friend said, was it because of that? And I went, oh God, yeah, of course. I've got a feeling one of the extras in this is Colin Thomas, who plays Leela's dad in Face of Evil, one of those rare instances of an actor with a credited part who then becomes an uncredited actor later on. And I'm not talking about people like Pat Gorman who go back and forth. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. We did good. Oh, bless her. Time will tell. Always does. I love. Yeah, he has that wonderful sort of mysterious melancholy. It's a beautiful ending, that. And the Mike. Yeah, I think the Mike Smith story is very brave, and it's good stuff for a children's tea time television show, and I think is wholly successful. And I didn't know Dursley McClendon before, and then obviously he'd pop up in the odd thing, and then suddenly you read in Doctor Who magazine that he died so young, and died under very, very tragic circumstances, which have been and those terrible times have been very wonderfully evoked and staged and explained and dramatized. with typical comic verve and harsh reality, absolutely, brilliantly, forensic, the psychoanalyzed, which is the key to good characterization by Russell T Davies in It's a Sin. So that gives this story another kind of aspect all of its own, that it will now forever be linked with that Russell T Davies drama that came later. But I know it without that, and I know Dursley McClendon without that, and I think sometimes we don't want to lose him because he's the guy that established that story. I think in that series, because he wasn't the Ollie Alexander character, I'm sure they picked and chose bits that they wanted to tell that story, and it's lovely that he's inspired such a thoughtful and human piece that has made us examine those times, which definitely, those attitudes, we have to be just so aware of how terrible some of the attitudes around that condition and around that time of very recent and lived history were, lest we pat ourselves on the back that we've been terribly civilized for a very long time, and how sad. I mean, he was a terrific young actor, and is now died far too young. But I think that's a great, his casting and his presence as that, and deciding to tell, because I think sometimes it's all too easy to portray extreme politics as the weapon of the despot and of the cruel and of the obviously unkind. But unfortunately, the problem with all extreme politics is that very nice, decent people believe it or are persuaded by it. No bad things that happen through history were all done by, jackbooted sadists, because fortunately, and one has to think this, that there aren't enough of those in the world at any one time for them to reach critical mass. However, what they can do is they can persuade anybody else. I was going to say ordinary people, but that takes me out of the equation. No, they can persuade us, you, me, everybody, with a honeyed word here or a piece of propaganda there, that the cause of the world's problem is somebody else, and not somebody in a castle or in an office building, or untouchable and on high, making decisions that affect the rest of us, but the person next door to you, or those people in the next town who look different, or whatever, or those people, particularly those that look different. And that's why it's so clever having the Daleks being interracial purity as well, because essentially it says, that thing that is a bit like you but not quite like you, and there's nothing worse, and Doctor Who does this very well, the thing that's like a crack in the wall, the thing that's like a gas mask, the thing that's a sort of parody of what we know and recognise, is actually more scary sometimes than a big monster out of nowhere. So then that's where prejudice comes from. People that seem like us but slightly different, so they don't talk quite the same way, or they don't quite look the same way, or they have religious customs that aren't the same as ours. That seems even more wrong because they're a bit like us, And I think that's a natural instinct that has to be curbed by intellect and by decency. I think it's probably because you see it in the animal kingdom. Don't you? It's what Nigel Neal does brilliantly. Quatermass in the Pit. He equates racial superiority with the cleansing of the hives in the insect world, where mutations in order to preserve the perfect genetics or whatever of the hive are rooted out. Well, the Nazis saw anything away from the Aryan pattern as a sort of genetic mutation. So wipe that out, and then you have the purity distilled of, that creates the Aryan perfection and short men with little moustaches. But do you know what I mean? That's the ethos behind it, of going, well, we must go for that ideal of purity, and that is because, like, as human beings, because back in the day we had to be very tribal. You would, as an instinct, want to cast out or want to reject things that didn't look like your tribe. Now, we don't do that anymore. We shouldn't do that because we've learned and we've evolved, and we do, and those things aren't needed. But back hundreds of years, when everybody was in individual villages or whatever, and the society was not the society we have now, there may have been a sort of drive, an evolutionary need to do that, to keep your tribe, small and compacted, safe, and all like you, and blah 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 blah. But we have moved on centuries and centuries later, and if we have those instincts, they are dangerous primal instincts that we must, in the same way that you might want to beat to death the person that ran away with your wife. Well, civilization goes, well, no, you can't do that. We can't just go around killing people who have wronged us. We have due process, we have systems in place, because we are no longer sort of feral creatures, and we've evolved to have systems of justice and things where we have to do things that make us feel uncomfortable but are for the greater good or whatever. So any tribal instincts that we have, they come from something ancient and something plausible in terms of, as I say, what might have been an instinct that came from something real back in the day. But we have, surely what civilization is going, well, whatever those things are that are buried in our subconscious, they are what we have to reject now through the things that make us what we are in the 21st century as a civilized society, is that you don't reject something because it's different from you, and actually you can benefit from things that have differences from you. And of course, not everything that seems different from you is different from you. Sometimes it has bits that are the same as you as well, and it's only through exchanging ideas with different people and different cultures and all of that we understand, that there are a lot of things that are more similar than we might think, but we don't know that until we exchange ideas and talk and treat all human beings as equal. So it's all, I don't know how I got from Dursley McClinton to the triumph of civilization and intellect, but it's because he's playing somebody. He's playing an everyman who in so many ways seemed lovely and heroic and nice, but who'd fallen prey to a base instinct. And I think it's much more interesting to me. It's really easy to go, fascists are bad. It's harder to go, real people, nice people, your kindly neighbour who'd go shopping for an old person or rescue a child out of a hole, might also not blink if they saw somebody with a different coloured skin get taken away in a van, and those things happen. And it's more interesting to examine why than just to go, all fascists are bad, because that, I think, enables us to try not to look at why those things might happen and how we might facilitate that through some of the things that we allow to happen. Because we all turn a blind eye to bad things in our society if they're, if doing something about them might make us uncomfortable. So I think Remembrance works on so many levels in that regard. I think it's smart and it's clever, but it doesn't. And although it's there in the subtext, and although they have the conversations about they hate each other's chromosomes, it's not. There's no sense of being lectured ever, I don't think. And sometimes I think the Cartmel era can seem a little naive and sixth form college-y sometimes in its way that it parades the issues. But I will cut it some slack because it's a long time ago. Doctor Who didn't doing that in a show that has to be suitable for children is, I think, sometimes quite difficult because you can't be too subtle sometimes because you're writing for a different audience. So and I certainly admire the intent and happy when Doctor Who does it. And again, especially when it's not a lecture or a leaflet, it is primarily Doctor Who, a piece of entertainment, a piece of zesty, fun entertainment as well. But I think Remembrance of the Daleks manages to be zesty. You've got a madcap Doctor with his very game companion, and lovely, the lovely guest characters, who I think work very well, but are totally believable too. Lots of explosions, and in a peppy, exciting production. I can't believe I spent so much time being furious with it. I'm an idiot. Oh, past me is an idiot. And who knows, I might listen to that probably quite turgid lecture on civilization and the rise of fascism in 40 years' time and go, what on earth was I talking about? What a pretentious idiot. But there we go. My heart is pure, and even if sometimes the words that come out of my mouth are tainted with garbage. So anyway, listen, what is my favourite thing about episode 4? And what is my favourite thing overall? Bearing in mind we're at 2-2. And Charles in episode 1, didn't he, had the 60s setting, whereas I had the Dalek extermination effect. Episode 2, we had the kind of racism thing, didn't we? And that lovely cafe scene. Episode 3, we had the sort of solidity of the production, didn't we? And he specified particularly the landing of the Dalek spaceship. I actually this is terrible. I actually might go for all the explosions, because I have to say Doctor Who does talk very well. It does philosophical ideas very well. It does character very well. It does humour very well. But what brought me to Doctor Who as a kid was it was scary and exciting, and it couldn't always do action as well. Now, I know there was action by Havoc in the 70s. That sort of predates me. And a lot of the action for me was people sort of lumbering slowly down corridors with the odd very exciting laser beam painted on afterwards. So to have sort of street battles with explosions, and I love the way that Andrew Cartmel sort of cuts so that an explosion just happens as he changes camera angle and the Dalek bats backwards. It's a great use of Dalek props because it makes you think, I saw that one moving literally a second ago. So it's like things are being sort of smashed as they're retreating. I love that shot of when they're retreating and that one gets sort of hit. And it's obviously it's a dummy one, but it wasn't a dummy in the previous shot because it was the front Dalek that was mobile. And I think all of that stuff is really, really clever. That blowing up of the gates, and that's given us the lovely story of them setting off the alarms. I'm sorry, Doctor Who is intelligent, it's smart, it's witty, it's a cut above most action adventure because it has a heart and a soul and a great sense of humour. But very, very rarely does it have loads of really brilliant exploding bits in. And Remembrance of Daleks has a lot of really good, brilliant exploding bits in. So I think for me, I'm going to go for all the explosions as my favourite bit of episode 4. And for episode for my bonus thing, which accompanies which is the whole thing. I mean, I suppose we've already kind of said, haven't we? Andrew Morgan in terms of the solidity of the production, it sort of touches with the explosions there as well. I think what I might go for. Well, do I either go for the fact that it ties in with the first Doctor? It is 25th. I think I'm just going to say, and I'm sure Charles won't choose this, but the renaissance that it marks. Season 24. I mean, I like watching season 24 now. It's cheeky. It's sometimes bonkers. But it's trying to do something different. It's an attempt to replace some of the limitations that Doctor Who is under with a sort of comic book zany sensibility. But unfortunately, I think that sometimes with season 24 means that it looks a bit more like, comes across a bit more like Galloping Galaxies than it does 2001, or even Judge Dredd, if we're going for the comic book thing. And it was tough being a Doctor Who fan off the back of seasons 23 and 24, which were really hard as a Doctor Who fan to hold your head up high as you went into school. Now, I still had problems with Doctor Who in the later two seasons, but a lot of those were problems of my own manufacturing and my own determination to find life difficult and to make the things I love cause me distress. I hope, but now that I'm 49, I've got over that a little bit, and I do see. I sometimes find myself doing it, but I do see it in other people, and it's instructive. But nonetheless, watching that first episode, and there's a lovely trailer that I still have on a VHS somewhere for that first episode when he's going, "It's me, the Doctor," and all of that, and it did feel like the show had really suddenly come together and got better. And I think, is it NME or something? The Discontinuity Guide quotes, is it NME saying it was one of the reasons to be alive that year? It did feel like, even if it was only certain corners of the media, Doctor Who's always had scorn poured on it, and that's always been a cause of great fury and embarrassment for me. But certain little corners of pop culture were suddenly going, again, actually, Doctor Who's all right. And I certainly felt I could go, I talked about last week about, having a relative who, even in a really brilliant episode finds a line about putting your backs into it. There are always people who are going to just sit and look and go, well, there's a reason that's crap. And I think what I've ultimately learned over the years is to go, well, they're going to do that anyway. So there's no point getting annoyed with them. That's their loss. They're not winning. I wouldn't want to be that cynical or that dismissive when actually I can see so many positives in the hard work and endeavour and creativity and artistry that goes into these things. And I don't want to be that person, and I'm fine with that. And that's fine. If they want to be like that, that's fine. That's how they get through their life, and that's fine. It doesn't ultimately do any harm, and it doesn't matter. Don't sweat it. You've got to engage in the world in the way that you want to, and I want to engage in the world where I can mine creative endeavour and artistic expression and storytelling on the terms of the people telling the story, and trying to embrace that. And sometimes I think people are expressing ideas badly or wrongly, or have read the world wrong, and if they do it ham-fistedly, I'll sort of go, oh well, I'm not going with that. I see where you're going for. I'm not going with that. But the purpose of Remembrance of the Daleks is to put on a really enjoyable, peppy action adventure that's got a subtext if you want it to be there, that's intelligently wrought, and also crucially for that time, the production is so far ahead of if you think about Dragonfire and Paradise Towers and Time and the Rani and Delta. I mean, Time and the Rani has my all-time favourite naff bit of Doctor Who, which is that, in the quarry, that concrete piping that they've turned into space piping by sticking a bit of tinsel around it. Whereas I think even today, the production of Remembrance of the Daleks is superb. Just the way the colours of it, the way that it looks, but the design, Martin Collins' design. Andrew Morgan, who directed Time and the Rani. And actually, a lot of his camera work and stuff is very good. But, it has, a naff shambling monster, and, it can't escape a lot of its inherent problems. And some of the staging, actually, some of the studio work isn't great. But it's a different, Remembrance of the Daleks comes in, and it's bold and it's confident, and it celebrates the past. It's got nods to the past, which are rather lovely, even if you have to get over the fact that the book cover's wrong and the spelling of Foreman is wrong. None of that actually gets in the way of the story. The story doesn't eat itself up in its own self-satisfaction or continuity. The continuity is there and it's enjoyable, but it doesn't get in the way of the story. I love and now it's time for the new programme. Because you could do that whatever you want. It's fun, and it's there and it's gone. Beautiful. Don't tie yourself up in knots about it. Just enjoy it. It's a nice little bit of texture that says this is a show that's 25 years old this year, and it comes from somewhere. But at the same time, it's going, this is bold and this is new, and we don't, let's not have Davros until right to the end. Let's mix up what we do with the Daleks. They're actually at civil war with each other because because of the whole racial purity thing that is their driving force, but actually becomes their undoing, which is a fascinating idea, which is a great use of the core metaphor that the Daleks are, that the Daleks are Nazis. Okay, well, what's one of the many problems with the whole racial purity thing? Well, if you're a race that's had to, pick from elsewhere in order to survive, that's going to scupper your own ideology, and pop will eat itself, kind of thing. Fascism will exterminate itself, and that was always Davros's problem. He created a thing that wanted, that survival of its own kind in its own image was absolutely of paramount importance, which pushes him out of the picture, which is brilliant. You've created a monster not quite in your own image, and so will therefore be destroyed by it, which is all very, very clever stuff. I love all of that. But this is the story directly after Dragonfire. This is 2 stories after Paradise Towers, 3 stories after Time and the Rani, and it looks like a different show. It's got the confidence of a different show. I think there is confidence in season 24 of, as I say, boldly trying to be that sort of comic strippy thing, and and I sort of admire that, but much more in retrospect, to be perfectly honest. And now much more than I can intellectualize it, and now much more that it's part of a big mosaic where the future of the show isn't balancing on the precipice of whether that works or not. This feels like, it's unapologetic. It's moving forward, looking back a little bit with a cheeky smile, but it's moving forward, and it's confident, and it's fresh, and its 2 leads fit it like a. In fact, its 2 leads are a sort of antidote and a tonic there to the more traditional action adventure stuff. Having these sort of slightly zany leads works much better, because in fact it's almost like Sylvester McCoy's too much like the stories in season 24. They're as sort of strange and chaotic as the Doctor, whereas this Doctor sort of flitting through this as the sort of chaotic, whimsical clown amidst a recognisable backdrop of 60s England and solid sets and straight performances, just seems. It seems what the Doctor should be doing, coming in and shaking it up, and I really like their energy. Even though, as I say, I sometimes think Sylvester McCoy's vocal performance doesn't quite do it for me, but that's okay, because what you get instead is all of the other stuff that he has that comes from the fact that he's not, he's a slightly more chaotic performer. So it's all good. It's all good. And him and Sophie Aldred have obviously, it's only their second story. They've got such a great rapport. And she's an attempt to do something different with the companion character as well. So I think it's the fact that it's a renaissance of the Daleks. It's not a renaissance of the Daleks. It's a renaissance of Doctor Who. The fact that, 2 years before its unkind cessation, the show was going, we're working hard to reinvent ourselves and be fresh and confident and exciting, and it is a real upsurge in quality. So yeah, so part 4, my favourite thing is explosions, and part 5 is that long, probably slightly nebulous idea of Renaissance. Charles will now, no doubt, say 2 things that I'll think, oh God, yeah, that's so obvious, I should have said that. But that's the nature of this. This is unrehearsed. I don't think about the episodes before I go in.
As requested, here are 5 things.
Sorry, I started Charles's thing right from the beginning, so I now just have to find the point where he talks about episode 4. What are Charles's favourite things about episode 4 and as a whole?
So, 4th thing number 4, and I'm actually going to cheat, if that's okay. I'm going to cheat because I'm going to pick something that is in the original script for episode 4.
He's going to choose, which I didn't talk about. And actually, when I was in the shower last night, I was thinking, I must talk about that bit. I say I don't really think about it. I did think about this bit, and I didn't do it, where it's the scene where the Doctor says, I am more than just another Time Lord, which I think is quite nice because it's just a line and it just adds a little mystery. It doesn't give anything away, and it's absolutely how to re-inject the mystery into the Doctor, because it's quite nebulous. But it just goes, we know Time Lords, we know blah, 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 we know... And to just go, let's stick some Who back into it. But without creating a whole new mythology, but just going, well, we'll make a few suggestions here and there about shadowy stuff. Sylvester McCoy's great at that. But of course, that scene is not in Remembrance of the Daleks. It's a cut scene. Fortunately, we still had it because they were smart enough to start hanging on to stuff at this point. But I cannot believe that. I mean, I didn't talk about it. I probably did some stuttering social consciousness stuff, or we got stuck in a mixed metaphor that put me up a gum tree without a paddle. But nonetheless, I'm me not mentioning that lovely cut scene, that the thing to say about it is it's nicely done, and it's a nice way of, trying to re-inject the mystery into Doctor Who, and it's quite fun, and isn't it nice that we still have it, is one thing. But to choose it as my favourite thing of the episode, that would be malfeasance in Happy Times and Places law, and Charles seems to me to have... Well, yeah, you heard him. Let's hear him compound his felony.
Was shot as part of episode 4, and was, I think, in the original edit of episode 4, but isn't actually in the episode as broadcast because it ended up on the cutting room floor. And it's a tiny little moment in which the Doctor is talking to Davros over his sort of makeshift 1960s Skype, and I think Davros, I can't remember the exact wording, I think Davros accuses him of just being another Time Lord. And the Doctor says he's far more than just another Time Lord. And he doesn't say anything else. There's no follow-up to that. It's just a little throwaway comment. But it's kind of emblematic of Andrew Cartmell's entire approach to the character and the mythos of the Doctor. It's all about trying desperately to restore some mystery to the character. Ultimately, the character, the title of the show is Doctor Who. The whole point of the programme is meant to be that you don't know who this man is. You're not supposed to know exactly where they've come from, exactly what their past is. You should get vague hints of some kind of dark mythology. There's something strange and dark and traumatic has happened, but you must never ever know what it is. And one of the big problems is that by the time you reach 1988, all sorts of writers have come along explaining away a little bit more each time about the Doctor's past and his origins and why he left his alien planet and what that alien planet's called and who he lived with and what his family are and absolutely everything about them, until the show is no longer Doctor Who. You no longer have any mystery to the character at all, at which point the show basically stops working. And I just love that little exchange where he says he's far more than just a Time Lord. I love its vagueness. I love the fact it asks so many more questions than it answers and has no intention of answering those questions. And it's just one moment among many, of course, in that sort of late 80s period that tries desperately hard to make the Doctor a little bit more mysterious. And you know what? Most of the time it doesn't actually work. But I love the effort. I applaud the effort. I applaud the fact that the Time Lords are often talked about in Remembrance of the Daleks. There's all sorts of little mentions of their mythology and their background, but you never see them. There's no actual visual evidence of what they look like or what they sound like or realistically what Gallifrey is about on any meaningful level. It's all just sort of shadows and shapes. And you get the sense that the Doctor somehow belongs in those shadows and You're not quite sure how. It could be said that maybe certain of the Cartmel era stories get a tiny bit bogged down in that, and I think Remembrance of the Daleks does at times as well. Ultimately, I don't really care what the Hand of Omega is, and I don't really want to hear about it in too much detail, to be honest. But you have to applaud the intent behind it, the intent to establish the Doctor as this sort of unknowable mystery, and then just get on with telling a good story. Not allowing the story of the Doctor, not allowing the Doctor's origins to sort of become the story. And yeah, I think Remembrance of the Daleks is a lot more successful with balancing that than many of the stories are. And yeah, it's one of the things I love about it. And it's all sort of distilled in that little throwaway line when he says he's far more than just a Time Lord. And I really like that moment. I think it's a shame they cut it. But the thing I like about it most is the fact that it's not followed up in any way whatsoever.
Now, this is very interesting. First of all, disclaimer, that might sound like Charles is having a go at the Chris Chibnall era, but I've got a feeling he recorded that before much of, if or indeed any of the, pre-Hartnell Doctors, Joe Martin, all of that stuff, which is a bit more blatant about reshaping the origins of Doctor Who. So before anyone gets any cross or writes in and goes, don't be mean about my thing, what I like, I think he's making a more general point rather than targeted dig. So, and in fact, I'm not sure he even I don't want to. Anyway, so I think it's more of a general point, and I definitely concur with that point. I think Doctor Who is important. I think one of the most important decisions made in the genesis of Doctor Who was to change Susan's line, I was born in the 49th century, to I was born in another time, another place. Both do the same job. The one that they went with makes it more mysterious and unknowable, and but also something that you kind of know isn't really important to find out, because once you find it out, where do you go? Once you find out there. Now, the Time Lords were added to add a bit of mythology to the show, and of course they have the advantage for me is that it happened before I was born, so it was already part of the show's makeup, so it wasn't spoiling anything, it wasn't ruining the magic of Doctor Who. But within that, and you could say that destroyed that a lot of that mystery of the Doctor Who. But I think I don't want to know too much about the Doctor's childhood. One, because I'm not that interested in kids in drama. Do you know what I mean? Because it was certainly not in Doctor Who, because I was a kid. I didn't want kids. I didn't want to know about kids. I wanted to know about what it was like when you grew up and things happened and you went and did exciting things and you were allowed to because you were a grown-up and you were independent. I think the less you know about the Doctor, the more that each individual child, and Doctor Who is so important for children, can map themselves onto the character of the Doctor. And frankly, that can happen whatever gender, colour, whatever. It's not really about that, is it? It's about a hero with whom you identify because they have the characteristics of being a bit of a loner, not quite fitting in, flawed, not all the traditional things that a lot of other television heroes are in terms of physicality and being popular and fitting in and all of those sorts of things. But again, this may be me mapping myself onto Doctor Who, but the more vague the origins and who the Doctor is the more multi-interpretational that character is, which means that the character will appeal to more children, but probably largely children, I think, who maybe are a little bit lost or in need of a less traditional sort of hero. And I think that is vital to the show. So I think anything that, re-injects a bit of mystery into the origin of because once you've explained who the Doctor is, it's only going to be, but once you say the Force is midichlorians, you've destroyed the sort of magic. Now, I don't like magic in my science fiction. I prefer a tachyon to a invocation of Anubis, because I can latch onto science. I can't, even if it's nonsense science, even if it's Bidmead science or whatever. in a way that I can't latch onto a spell. In the same way, the magic of the character is that it's not been broken down like science into its base constituents. There is an air of something that you can't quite explain, or you can't quite get into. And then in seeking to explain it, you go, well, I just feel comforted by that presence, that character. I like the humour. I like the braveness. It's a character that I would feel that I would want to be under those circumstances. Funny in the face of danger, not scared. Or if I'm scared, brave anyway. You can aspire to be Doctor Who, but only if, there's enough vague about the character that you can map your DNA onto that character. So I absolutely applaud any attempt to add more mystery to the character, and certainly that scene. But I didn't choose it as my thing for episode 4 because it's not in episode 4. And the sheer nerve of the man who chose to cut the rough and tumble machine scene out of the Macra Terror, taking an actual broadcast scene out of Doctor Who for the animation, then voting for a scene that was never in Doctor Who in the first place, means that Charles Norton has just been struck off my Christmas card list. He hasn't really. He's lovely. But what a nerve. So anyway, let's see. Now we're equal, even though he's cheated. But let's see if I could still win. I could be more than just another podcast host. I could be a victorious one. It would be the second time in the series history if this happens. If he chooses one of the things that I have already chosen, or the same thing that I chose for the bonus thing. So it's possible, but he won't. He'll probably choose something, a font or something. Let's see.
Okay, so final thing number 5. And again, I'm going to cheat because it doesn't actually actively relate to any one particular episode as such. It's kind of the thing that happens before the story starts. And that's the pre-title sequence. The pre-title sequence to episode 1. Doctor Who didn't really do pre-title sequences very much in the 1980s. There was one before this, right at the start of the decade. Castrovalva had a pre-title sequence. And Remembrance of the Daleks has one in 1988. I think that is basically it. I don't think there are any others. But they're always so effective. It's such a wonderful way of opening the story. The Americans call them the cold open, don't they? It's just a really effective way of starting a story. It gives you the opportunity to set the scene and use it as a hook to sort of pull people in. And I can think of few Doctor Who stories in general that do it as well as Remembrance of the Daleks. The pre-title sequence is just a single shot. All which basically happens is the camera pulls back and then the episode starts. You start on this shot of the planet Earth, the camera pulls back to this spaceship, and then the titles start, and that's all. Visually, that's all that really happens. But it's also all that needs to happen, and the amount of information that they actually get in to that little camera move is really very skillful. It tells you, due to the radio messages you can hear, it tells you that this story is going to be set in the early 60s. It tells you it's set in a world that's somewhat in flux. It brings with it all sorts of sense of sort of foreboding and dread. And then you see this spaceship and you know that this little planet in the year 1963 is in danger from this great big spaceship that's going to come and do something horrible. And it establishes all of that in just a few seconds, and it does it really, really well. And it's a really effective and well thought out pre-title sequence. Not over busy, but just sort of does what it needs to do. And I wish they'd done more of them. I wish there were more pre-title sequences in Doctor Who. I wish they were like shows like the Professionals and the New Avengers that sort of capitalised on the pre-title sequences in the late 70s. I can see so many stories that would have been immeasurably improved from having having a cold open. But yeah, we don't see it often in the show's original run, but we see it with Remembrance of the Daleks, and it's just a fantastic sort of scene setter for the rest of the story. So there you go, 5 things about Remembrance of the Daleks that I like, five moments that I think are really effective and make it, I think, one of the strongest stories of the 1980s, and certainly I'd argue the strongest story of Sylvester McCoy's time.
Well, thank you, Charles. I mean, no, that's a perfectly legitimate choice. It's cheating. It's not. It's a bonus thing. It can be the rule about the bonus thing. It can be anything. I mean, so long as it's in the show, which which you hadn't managed with your previous choice. And you said it didn't pertain to any particular episode. It does. It pertains to episode 1. It's part of episode 1. Just happens before the credits. But yes, I mean, it is brilliant. I mean, the only thing apart from the Cast Revival one that I say is remotely similar and gives me an equal frisson is I love the bit because we know that Ambassadors of Death it does the titles differently, so it has the opening titles. But then it has the cliffhanger reprise and then the story title, which is glorious. But of course, for episode 1, there's no cliffhanger to reprise. So instead, it has effectively its own pre-titles. And with that, Ralph Cornish talking to Van Leyden, and he goes, "Something took off from Mars." And it goes, then the title screaming. And that's the only other real equivalent of a cold open, isn't there, in Classic Who? And I love that as well. But I really do like the one for Remembrance of the Daleks, because as you say, it's done with economy. It's very, very simple, but it's hugely atmospheric. It's well rendered as well. It's a good special effects shot, but the use of the clips makes it it gives it a sense of occasion. It's quite atmospheric. There's something about hearing archive clips, but it's also slightly educational as well. And I always think of the way that JFK says the air instead of air. We all breathe the same air. And they were going to have Bob Dylan as well, weren't they? They were going to have a piece of Bob Dylan music on as well, and they ended up not doing it. But it has Charles de Gaulle, doesn't it? And it has Martin Luther King. And that's brilliant because it feels so special that you've got these classic moments of historical audio, this historical audio, which is the actual people, which makes which gives it a bit of sort of genuine heft, really, because you've got the actual people. I'm sure. I bet on IMDb they spoilt it now by putting JFK in the cast, putting archive footage. Why? I hate that. But it's the fact that it's the actual people, which then evokes the time. It gives it a sense of scale. It gives it a sense of the momentousness of history as we understand it, because when those words were being said, who knew that they would resonate so far forward? But of course they did, and they turned out to be hugely important. I mean, resonant at the time, no doubt, but they've stood the test of time, and they now stand as sort of totems of seismic events of that period of history. And Doctor Who started in that period of history, so it ties it all together. So it's a momentous piece of Doctor Who because it's also looking back to the first, it's 25 years of Doctor Who, looking back to the start of Doctor Who, but it's also placing it in that historical context. And it's doing this within a sequence that's less than 30 seconds, and it's a space eye view of Earth, and we know how much we love those. The new series does them. To start seasons, to start the whole of the new series, and the shot of the spaceship. I'm sad that the titles don't kick in until after the sort of, it looks like the shots run out and it sort of pauses. You could say it's a freeze frame, but it does just look like the effects have run out. But it's really economical, and anything that is done with economy, I think the best and the most beautiful aspects of clever storytelling are economy. And I say that as somebody who I know speaks too much, says too much, uses 3,000 words where 3 will do, and that's why I really, really admire when anybody does storytelling that is so effective and emotional and informative and does it in an economical way. I admire that. I think it's hugely to the credit of the people that do it, that trust the audience and trust themselves to give just enough to give you everything you need and to provide atmosphere and drama and a cold opening that leads into an explosion of wow, we're going to have a great adventure. And the adventure lives up to the promise. But it's a great opening. It's a great moment. And of course, now the cold opening, the pre-titles, is part of what Doctor Who, it's part of what Doctor Who does so well. We've sort of exchanged the cliffhangers, really, of the multi-part adventures for the pre-titles, and having thought that the cliffhangers, which are so important, such an important part of Doctor Who, would be a great loss to it, actually have metamorphosed into something different, and there are any number of cold openings which from scratch create anticipation and edge of the seat and oh my god moments before the adventure has even began. And they take their lead from in Doctor Who terms from that one. I'm not saying they're directly inspired. Russell T Davies doesn't need to be inspired by a moment from a 1988 Doctor Who story, but in terms of chain of events and patterns, whether they exist or not. The pre-titles in modern Doctor Who are doing the same job that one does in Remembrance of the Daleks, and it all adds to the great number of things that makes it an excellent story. I'm so glad I learned to stop worrying and love the Hand of Omega. I've really enjoyed that. And I'm so used to being much more excited about stuff that happened before I was born, just for various reasons that I've probably gone into many times. That this process where I'm getting to look at the stuff that was new to me and worrisome to me because I lived with the fear of Doctor Who being cancelled, where I can now just enjoy it for what it is. For not what it threatened to be, or for what it might not be, or for what other people might think it was, and to look at it as a piece of history itself, now further away now than An Unearthly Child was when I was watching this when it went out. I'm so lucky to have seen that stuff go out first time. I'm actually lucky to have the chance to revisit it with the thoughtful, intelligent stimulation of friends who can throw in context and observations that make me think and reassess and reframe, but also to share it with you listeners without whom this would just be I'd just be throwing stones at the moon. It's nice to feel that there are people out there listening to this and hopefully enjoying it, and that maybe what I say might make you look at the story again in a different way, or reframe it, or just enjoy the communal experience of watching a show and knowing that there's somebody else that shares your thoughts or has different thoughts to you, but that you can either agree with or disagree with. But it makes it all part of a great big tapestry. I'm actually feel lucky that I'm able to look back on this stuff from the safety of, as I record this, Doctor Who being still present. It looks like it's got a very exciting future. It's fondly regarded. People are excited by it. I'm excited by what's to come, but I'm also thrilled to revisit what is gone. So yeah, there's a lesson there. It's worth sometimes checking in with your past, just in case you've left a planet-destroying device in a coffin and you kind of need to attend to it. Yeah, I'm just going to nip down to the local undertakers to see if I've left any genocide machines kicking about.
I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
Okay, we haven't had one of these for a while, and it's not for me. It's just been pointed out to me that Charles suggests that there's no pre-credit sequence other than Castrovalva, and of course there is one in Time and the Rani, the pre-credit sequence that leads to the Doctor's regeneration in Time and the Rani. And I don't think I corrected Charles, so somebody I'm sure out there wants to write in and correct him or me for not correcting him. And indeed one of my lovely patrons has gone that, and I went, did I say that there wasn't another one? And said no, it's not that you didn't say that there was, but Charles did. So anyway, whoever you decide to blame, we are aware at Happy Times and Places that there is a pre-credits sequence at the beginning of Time and the Rani. But I thought I'd use this opportunity to also say, on reflection, I've been thinking about this, because it's been a very long and rambly, but very enjoyably celebratory look back at Remembrance of the Daleks, where I also, it's been pointed out on Patronville, which interests me, that it never occurred to me that the Doctor's doings with the Hand of Omega, the programming that he does when he comes back. It wasn't that it was programmed before Hartnell left. McCoy's come back and programmed it, and then it does the stuff to the Daleks. So he didn't need to know about the Daleks being around for it to do what he asked it to do. That had never occurred to me, and a few people have pointed it out to me and gone, "Why are you worried about that? It was just a powerful device that Hartnell had left behind." And then McCoy's come back, and the Daleks are around, and he's programmed it to blow up the Daleks and Skaro. And for some reason, I got it in my head that Hartnell had left it programmed to destroy the Daleks and Skaro, which, of course, he couldn't have done in the continuity of the show because he hasn't encountered the Daleks yet. But that's what the story wants us to think. And I'd never done what seems to me now a fairly... I'm doubting myself even now, though. I'm going, but I'm sure in the story... Anyway... it's funny how you can get an idea fixed in your head and it only takes somebody else, and I've seen Remembrance of the Daleks loads of times, somebody else to go, yeah, but it could be that, and you go, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? So just goes to show how being single-minded about something, either positively or negatively, if you're accepting of just a nudge in a different direction, you can find that all sorts of other possibilities open themselves up. So yes. So I accept that I might be my fury at the inherent contradiction within the storytelling of Remembrance of the Daleks might be entirely misplaced. The other thing I think what has been misplaced in this series of commentaries, and I don't know why, but I've just been reflecting on it, is enough mention of Ben Aronovich, who writes 4 very clever scripts, and the way that he ties in Dalek lore with what he wants to look at in terms of racism in human society, but also in 1960s Britain and all of that. But also, and this was pointed out in the chat in on my Patreon. Now, that's not a plug for this. I'm just trying to acknowledge that I haven't necessarily come up with all of this, and that there's some interesting conversations that have been prompted by outside forces that I gleefully embrace, and I'm grateful to the stimulation they have provided. But the way that he writes the language, the way that he writes the dialogue of Doctor Who. He writes dialogue that fits Doctor Who very well, and his storytelling is very suited to thrusting 80s Doctor Who into doing something slightly cooler and funkier and more intelligent. And I think he does deserve a great deal of credit for that. And it's not surprising that he's. But it is surprising in the sense that you always not every great person associated with our show goes on to get great plaudits outside of it, and sometimes it's for us to celebrate people like Kevin Stoney, who would totally be forgotten. Well, not for Doctor Who, I'm sure, pretty much. But somebody like Ben Aronovich, is hugely fated now outside the world of Doctor Who. But that means one shouldn't forget to fate him within the worlds of Doctor Who, where I think he, even though he only wrote 2 stories, he's an important voice, and he's certainly a vital part of the success of Remembrance of the Daleks. And I fear I perhaps didn't say his name enough during these sessions, so I'm happy to readdress that now. Hopefully that was more than just another podcast. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you did too. It has been pleasant. Happy times and places. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Charles Norton, who isn't on social media anywhere. I'm grateful to him, though, and to the patrons who make this podcast possible, and they include Steve Manfred, Gavin McLean, Lisa and Andrew, James Lark, Guy Lambert, Clive Lewis, Ashley Knight, Andy Kitching, Jess Jerkovic, Christopher Joyce, Andrew Jordan, Robert Jewell, Richie Howarth, Dave Hoskin, Legion Henderson, Paul Gregory, Fraser Gregory, David Green, Lisa C. Greco, James Gould, Paul Goodridge, Gary Gillett, Joe Ford, Mark Findlay Smith, John Elledge, Mark Dakin, John Curley, Andy Case, Paul Carrington, Paul Carnahan, Alex Kapajoglu, Robbie C., Robin Bland, Gary Byrne, Rick Byatt, Will Brooks, David Bickley, James Bell, Luke Atkins, Kevin Ashelford, John Arnold, Catherine Armitage, and Peter Adamson. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you too would like your name read out with increasing desperation, then that is one of the perks of becoming a patron at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get your name read out, you get bonus releases, you get advance material, you get exclusives, and everything is much more ahead than on iTunes and Spotify and all the other places out there. And there's monthly AMAs and pictures of my dog. £3 a month is the lowest tier. You can get 10% off that, and indeed off any tier, if you sign up for a year in one go. And as you ascend the tiers, you do get a few extra little trinkets, but all of the content is available at the lowest tier. Pop over, it's quite nice over there, it's jolly. If you can't or don't want to commit to a monthly thing, but you think I sound particularly needy, you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock if you've liked a particular podcast, or if you're feeling particularly flush, as a one-off, and you can do a one-off payment. You don't get any bonuses or anything. It's just a sign of your appreciation. It's like walking past me at the underground station and I'm playing a particularly good tune on my guitar and you've got a pocket full of change. But you don't have to do either of those things. These are free at the point of contact. But if you would like to support them by, I think they say subscribe and like, that helps more people know that these are out there and might make them avail themselves of these, which would be very nice, because it would sort of justify the fact that this is what I spend my time doing. And if you like them, maybe you know some other people who might like them. That costs you nothing, but 5 stars really helps on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and perhaps a couple of lines of review really help as well. And of course, anything on Twitter, Facebook, and other social medias is all good. But subscribe and like, tell people about these things, and I'd love you forever, even if we never meet. But the love is there in my heart. Talking of social media, go to @Haydoke Podcasts, HADOKE, on Twitter. Follow there. That's a feed just for news about these podcasts. I've got my own feed as well, @Toby Haydoke, which is about these podcasts and any other things I think of that are usually Doctor Who related, or plugging my comedy shows at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club, which is in Manchester, and that's every Tuesday, and that can be followed at Excess Malarkey, XSMALARKEY, at Excess Malarkey, which is a fine comedy establishment that I've been emceeing for the past 25 years. Come along, we've just moved venue, and it's beautiful. Things are going well, and we've got some fantastic comedians lined up every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Now, I normally do a bit of post-credits chunter, but over on Patronville, which I haven't made up, there's been a lot of love for Remembrance of the Daleks, and for, the mood of these past 4 episodes of Happy Times and Places. It all seemed to come together quite nicely. I don't know, I certainly enjoyed doing it, so I hope you enjoyed listening. But, the love is being spread, so I'm just going to read a few of the bits of feedback I got from various subscribers, because it's lovely. So Joe Llewellyn, who is someone I've never met, lives over there in America, unless you're listening in America, in which case I'm over there and you're over here living with Joe. But anyway, Joe says, Remembrance, why do I love it so much? I think it was the classic Who story that made me love the classic series. I'd not seen a lot of the classics and was sampling them. They were fine, but nothing was really clicking with me. Then, 10 years ago this month, I read the Wife in Space blog about Remembrance. I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, right after my deployment to Afghanistan, and I was having my shoulder looked at before being released from active duty. I had injured it playing American football in Kabul, but it didn't stop me from doing my job. I did want it documented in case it caused me problems later. Anyway, Sue Perryman's delight at Remembrance was enough for me to grab my external hard drive, which had all of existing Classic Who episodes and the recons as of early 2013, courtesy of the legendary Kabul share drive. I love that. So people serving in the armed forces in Afghanistan had a share drive that had all of Doctor Who on it. Extraordinary. And this is what I love about this. Joe and I have completely different lives, completely different stimuli, outlooks, all sorts of things. And I have lots of lovely chats with Joe online as a result of him becoming a patron. And I think, you learn from other people and people from different backgrounds and perspectives and points of view and all sorts of things, and all united by this love of Doctor Who. So it's great to hear from Joe. Anyway, I've interrupted Joe. I've since purchased, says Joe, every classic story properly, some more than once. So that's just to underline that the Kabul share drive did not deny royalties to any Doctor Who performers. Wow, the pacing, the cast, the action and the quiet moments, the dialogue, and unlike Mrs. Perryman, I kind of like the music. I think 21-year-old me would have been completely smitten by Sophie Aldred. Remembrance made it possible for me to watch, enjoy, and commit to Classic Who. Favourite classic story, Doctor and Companion. No other story, no matter how enjoyable, has changed my mind. Thanks, Joe. And the Wife in Space blog, by the way, if you don't know it, it's Neil and Sue Perryman. He is a fan, she is not. They're married, and they watch every Doctor Who story in order and blogged about it and turned it into a book. And it's great fun if you've not availed yourself of that. Philip Marsh says, this is ironically the first Doctor Who story I can remember watching. It had a lot to answer for, but yes, there are minor faults in the episode. He's talking about episode 1, as you rightly point out, but I'm still always amazed by how pacey the first episode is. It absolutely rushes along. McCoy's ability to keep scenes moving with his rapid delivery doesn't get enough credit in my opinion, and his almost throwaway delivery of some great lines, give me some of that Nitro 9 that you're not carrying, is a delight. The production is first-rate all round, the script is full of great lines, and the Doctor and Ace have instantly bonded into the most compelling team in years. How anyone would look at this and still think the show needed cancelling is beyond me. Very true, Philip. And people still kept coming in after that. Oh, Mark Trevor Owen says Dursley McClendon was interviewed on Manx Radio on the morning of the day this episode was shown. Early mornings, perhaps not a natural environment for a young actor, and he accidentally gave away the cliffhanger. He was very apologetic. James Lark. This story was my gateway drug, so it's impossible to be objective, but it's so good, isn't it? So much packed into one episode, so many details, the sheer confidence of the thing. This is episode 1 again. And to attempt to be a little bit objective, one thing that strikes me is that it heralds 2 series of mostly really, really good dialogue, witty, efficient, naturalistic, at which, in spite of some strong competition, Aronovich is the very best in this era. It's a little too easy to take for granted in a post-Buffy, or at least, to be honest, a post-Moffat age, but for classic TV, this feels really modern thanks to the script. Good point. Also, a cursory look through the New Adventures comics and other assorted 90s Who spin-offs will show how influential this kind of writing was and how it wasn't as easy as Ben Aronovich made it look. I don't think I talked about that enough over the 4 episodes, so thank you for bringing that up, James. I think that's very true. As for the cliffhanger, which I fear is mainly a problem for you and your biographer, Toby, I don't remember it being in the slightest bit implausible. This is cliffhanger to part 1 that I banged on about at length, if you remember, at the time, but I do remember running around the playground like a proverbial 60s child, shouting "exterminate" with several friends, and that perhaps is the point. I've had to remind myself of that over the years when I've been irritated by the slightly too catchphrasy monsters of New Who. Speaking of which, the stair sequence shows huge restraint and speed if you compare it to the 2005 equivalent. Thank goodness they didn't decide to have the Doctor or Companion stand at the top of the stairs and make a big thing of it back in 1988, is all I can say. Yes, thank you, James. I'm suitably chastised. Paul Carrington's second favourite Who of all time. I wonder what your favourite one is, Paul. Have we done it yet? If not, write in when you have. David Gillespie, the pairing of this with The Chase on VHS was a bold one. Yes, it was. But 11-year-old David loved them both. James Lark again now back on episode 2. Another thing that's really great about this story, and I didn't talk about this enough either, and I think I should have done. I wonder if I was being a bit cowardly, because I was talking with some friends about this last night, and we were all having a bit of a Kef McCulloch love-in. If you live in Australia, by the way, and are in an old people's home, Kef will play music at yours. That's what he does a lot of now, according to his website. And I really like Kef McCulloch's music. I'm not a fan of the theme, but I think his incidentals. There's a lot of them, and they're quite loud. But I don't know. I find it really. I find them comforting, and I think his score for Remembrance is excellent. And there's the bit where Urak comes in. And the Doctor threatens to smash the machine to pieces in Time in the Rani. It's a fantastic piece of music. So, but yes, James is saying the work of the unfairly maligned Kef McCulloch, which plays a huge part in selling this. It has weight and heft and injects a massive dose of adrenaline into the action scenes. I think perhaps the music even sells the repeated extermination at the start of the episode. It's also far more... This is episode 2, when Ace is at the playground. It's also far more daring music than people give it credit for. Kef heaves the Who synth sound into the late 80s, taking full advantage of the rich new samples available, and he writes with a startlingly bold approach to dissonance, bitonality, and the use of noise, that shriek when Sheard cops it. He also takes a truly cinematic approach to scoring, providing a clear sense of location and shape. Look at the way he underscores the cuts between the empty school and the Daleks transmatting in. We take that for granted now, but no other telly in the late 80s was doing this. I get that this sound has dated, I get that it's sometimes intrusive or not entirely well matched to the story, but Remembrance has an excellent mix, and in this story, it seems to me, the composer is perfectly suited to the material. James, I think that's a great advocacy and an informed one. I don't really know much about music, and the way you explain there why the music is special in places is very useful, so I hope you don't mind me quoting you there. Trevor Smith loves the story for many reasons, not least being Pamela Salem, who looks so hot. Thanks, Trevor. And Philip again thinks that the Doctor left the Hand of Omega behind because of Ian and Barbara, and then when he realised the Daleks were following him, he decided to use that fact to his advantage, rather than having left it there deliberately to use on the Daleks at a later date. Yeah. I buy that. Jim Smith, I missed this episode on original transmission because of the school celebration of the 1988 Olympics. He had to get a friend who went to a different school to record it and didn't see it until the weekend. Not that he's bitter or bears a grudge about this. Oh, I know only too well. I've got a list of the episodes out to go to people's birthday parties for. James Gould, talking about episode 3, says, I missed this episode, because I'd missed episode 3, I think, hadn't I? I'd missed this episode on first broadcast too. Doctor had been relegated to Sunday mornings by this stage in its run in New Zealand. That's sacrilege! And the first 2 episodes were on at 10:20am, but I hadn't noticed part 3 moved to 9:35am. I woke up to find I'd missed it. Cheers to the NZ Fan Club website for listing those broadcast times. Haha. I remember asking friends at school on Monday how on earth Ace had survived, and they told me the Doctor came in with this thing. Haha. Didn't see it until I got the VHS release a good 4 or 5 years later. Anyway, that spaceship would be my pick for this episode too. I don't know who in the production team even conceived of making an actual spaceship, but it's got to be one of the most impressive effects you'll ever see in the show's history. I wonder if the script just made everyone else raise their game in this one. Everything is so good. Okie dokie. And and I think that is it. Yes. So that is some feedback from Remembrance of the Daleks from the very lovely and kind people at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. It just trips off my tongue. And they're the people whose kind contributions help to keep these releases regular and, crucially, ad-free. So thanks to them, those named and those not. And I think that'll do for a post-credits shindig.